The man next door said his name was Michael Turner. Quiet, kind, always willing to help. Then I saw him slipping out at 3 a.m. with a duffel bag and gloves. 12 years on the run. One secret buried too deep. And I was the one who found it. Michael Turner arrived in the neighborhood on a rainy Thursday afternoon in early spring. His U-Haul truck pulled up quietly, and no one really noticed him at first, just another new face in the suburbs of Seattle, where people came and went more often than anyone liked to admit. But within a few hours, he was already out front, unloading boxes alone, rain dripping from his hood, face focused but calm. Jenna Lawson first saw him through her kitchen window. She lived 2 houses down, raising her 8-year-old son Ben on her own, balancing a full-time job and everything else life threw at her. She didn't usually pay much attention to new neighbors. Most kept to themselves, and she had enough on her plate. But something about Michael caught her eye. Maybe it was the way he paused to wave at the mailman, or how he helped an elderly woman across the street carry groceries without being asked. Within the first week, he'd become something of a mystery and a fascination on the block. He introduced himself simply as Michael. No last name unless someone pressed. Said he'd come from Oregon, worked remotely in IT, liked hiking, kept to himself. People liked him almost immediately. He was polite but never fake, helpful but not overbearing. When Mrs. Callahan's cat got stuck on her roof, Michael climbed up and got it down like it was the most natural thing in the world. When Jenna's kitchen faucet burst and she was seconds from breaking down in frustration, he showed up with a wrench, fixed it in minutes, and didn't ask for anything in return. Ben adored him almost instantly. Michael took the time to talk to him like a real person, not just some kid. He showed him how to oil his bike chain properly, gave him tips on building better Lego structures, and even taught him a simple card trick that kept him entertained for days. Jenna couldn't help but feel grateful and curious. Still, there was something quiet about him. Not the kind of quiet that made you uneasy, more like a weight he carried silently. He smiled often, but his eyes always seemed a little tired, like they were watching something far off, beyond what anyone else could see. He never talked about family, never had visitors, and didn't seem to own much beyond the essentials. His house remained mostly unfurnished for weeks. Then there was the barbecue. 2 weeks after he moved in, Michael hosted a neighborhood cookout in his backyard. He grilled burgers, brought out folding chairs, even played a mix of classic rock and soul from a small Bluetooth speaker. It was casual, unpretentious, and everyone came. Jenna watched him from across the yard, laughing with Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, flipping burgers like he'd lived there for years. For a moment, she thought maybe this was what they'd all been missing, a neighbor who brought people together, who reminded them how to slow down, connect, share a meal. As the sun dipped low and the kids played tag in the grass, Jenna stood next to Michael by the grill. "Nice move," she said, nodding toward the crowd. He glanced at her, a soft smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Just trying to make a good impression." "Well, mission accomplished," she said. He turned back to the grill, but Jenna caught something in his expression, just for a second, a flicker of something else. Not fear, exactly. More like awareness. As if he knew he was being watched. Or maybe as if he'd spent too long expecting to be. It was sometime after midnight when Jenna first saw him. She had woken up to a strange sound, like a car door closing softly, followed by the crunch of gravel underfoot. She pulled back her bedroom curtain and looked outside. There, under the dull glow of the streetlight, was Michael. He was wearing all black, hoodie pulled up, dark jeans, gloves. A duffel bag was slung across his shoulder. He moved quickly, glancing once over his shoulder before cutting across his lawn and disappearing into the narrow alley that ran behind the houses. Jenna stood frozen for a moment. She wasn't the type to snoop, but this wasn't normal. Michael didn't seem like the kind of person who had secrets, but there was no innocent explanation she could come up with for sneaking around the neighborhood in the middle of the night dressed like that. Still, she told herself it could be anything. Maybe he just liked walking late. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Maybe there was something private going on that had nothing to do with anything dangerous. But the bag. The way he moved. The way he kept looking behind him, it didn't feel right. She didn't see him come back. At some point, she must have fallen asleep, though the night felt long and restless. By morning, the memory of what she'd seen had already started to blur at the edges, but it still sat heavy in her mind. She tried to ignore it, went about her usual routine, got Ben ready for school, made coffee. Later that day, something stopped her on the porch. As she stepped outside to water the plants, her eyes landed on something near Michael's walkway. It was a glove, black leather, just like the ones he'd been wearing the night before. Only this one had something on it. She picked it up and saw a small, dark smear on the thumb. It wasn't paint. It looked like dried blood. She turned it over in her hands, unsure what to make of it. Her first instinct was panic, followed by confusion, and then disbelief. Michael had always seemed so calm, so considerate. He made sure to say good morning to every neighbor, remembered people's birthdays, brought soup to sick kids. None of it made sense. An hour later, she found herself standing in front of his house, gloves still in her hand. Before she could knock, the door opened. He stood there holding a coffee mug, hair slightly tousled, eyes puffy like he'd just woken up. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her expression. "I found this," she said, lifting the gloves slightly. "Outside. Thought it might be yours." He took it, looked at it for a moment, and nodded. "Yeah. Must have dropped it yesterday. I was trying to help a dog that got hit on 8th, blood probably got on it then." "A dog?" she repeated, eyebrows raised. "Yeah," he said, almost too casually. "It ran out into traffic. Some SUV clipped it. I managed to get it to a vet. No chip, though. They're trying to find the owner." Jenna didn't know what to say. The story was good. Too good. He spoke without hesitation, without fumbling. If he was lying, he was damn convincing. And yet, something inside her wouldn't settle. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. The practiced ease. She nodded slowly, thanked him, and walked back to her house. She watched him close the door, then sat in her kitchen for a long time, staring at the wall while her coffee went cold. Whatever that night had been about, it wasn't just a dog. A few days passed, but the feeling didn't. Jenna couldn't shake the image of Michael slipping into the shadows, dressed in black, or the glove with the bloodstain he explained away so easily. Still, life went on. She went to work, picked up Ben from school, made dinner, cleaned the kitchen, repeated it all the next day. Michael waved when he saw her, acted like nothing had changed, and maybe for him, nothing had. But something had shifted inside her. She didn't know if it was fear or instinct, but it had a grip on her that wouldn't let go. Then, one morning, something new arrived. As she sorted through the usual mail, bills, flyers, a magazine she never remembered subscribing to, she found a plain white envelope with no return address. Her name was written on the front in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. She stood in the hallway for a moment, just looking at it. Something about the envelope made her hesitate. It wasn't thick or heavy, but it carried a strange weight. She opened it carefully, pulling out a folded sheet of old newspaper. The edges were yellowed, the print faded, but clear enough. Her eyes landed on a grainy black and white photograph, and her breath caught. She stared at it, frozen. The man in the photo was unmistakable, even with the time-worn quality of the picture. It was Michael, or someone who looked exactly like him. The headline read, "Christian Reyes wanted for federal bank robbery, vanished in 2013. There were a few more details below, but her mind couldn't process them all at once. Her heart was pounding too loud. She sat down at the kitchen table, still holding the article. The man in the picture had shorter hair, a bit younger, clean-shaven, but it was him. Same eyes. Same jawline. Even the faint scar near his left eyebrow, the one she had noticed when he leaned over the grill at the barbecue. She read through the story slowly. Christian Reyes had been part of a cyber theft ring, accused of helping hack into a federal bank's systems. Millions were stolen, several people arrested. But one of them, Reyes, had slipped away. The last confirmed sighting was in New Mexico, years ago. Since then, nothing. Authorities believed he had fled the country or assumed a new identity. She stared out the window, her thoughts spinning. She thought about the duffel bag, the bloody glove, the late-night disappearance. And now this. It couldn't be a coincidence. If this was true, if Michael really was Christian Reyes, then he had been living next door under a false name for who knew how long. And yet, even now, part of her resisted the idea. He had helped her. Helped her son. He had fixed her plumbing, sat on her porch, smiled at her like he was trying to live a normal life. Could someone like that really be capable of a federal crime? She held the article in her hands like it was something radioactive, something that could burn her if she didn't handle it the right way. She looked at the door across the street, then back at the page. No return address. No note. Someone had sent this to her on purpose. Someone wanted her to know. And now she did. It took her 2 more days to gather the courage to confront him. During that time, Jenna watched him carefully, trying to reconcile what she had read with the man she saw every day. He still helped Mrs. Callahan take out her trash. He still laughed with Ben about some silly joke they had shared. He still looked her in the eye and smiled like nothing was wrong. But now, everything felt like a performance. Every gesture, every word, tinged with the possibility of being a lie. On the 3rd evening, just after sunset, she stood outside his door. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't knock right away. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say a dozen times. She had imagined every possible outcome, denial, anger, maybe even him running. But none of that prepared her for what she felt when the door finally opened. Michael looked surprised but not alarmed. He stepped aside immediately, as if sensing she had something serious on her mind. She walked into his house for the first time. It was clean but sparse, like someone had moved in temporarily and never bothered to fully unpack. The furniture was simple, practical. No photos, no decorations. No signs of a life that had been lived fully here. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just waited. She turned to face him, her voice low and unsteady. "I know who you are." He blinked, but his expression didn't change. He didn't deny it. He didn't ask what she meant. "You're Christian Reyes," she said. "The man wanted for robbing a federal bank. The one who vanished 12 years ago." Still, he said nothing. He sat down slowly on the edge of the armrest and let out a long breath. "Where did you find it?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "Someone mailed me an article. No name, no return address. Just, your face. Your story." He nodded once, like he'd been expecting this moment for a long time. Then he looked up at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was suddenly undeniable. "I didn't rob that bank," he said. "But I was involved. Not the way they made it sound, though." Jenna folded her arms, unsure whether to sit or stay standing. She didn't interrupt. "I was young. 23. I was good with computers, too good. I got pulled into a group that promised quick money, fast jobs, no violence. Just data. Just numbers. I believed them." His voice tightened, as if the memories came with their own kind of pain. "I helped them build a system to breach bank security. I didn't know what they really planned to do with it until it was too late. By the time I figured it out, millions were already gone. And they didn't need me anymore. They pinned it all on me. My name was all over the logs, the access points. I was the easiest one to scapegoat." He paused, then stood up, walking slowly toward the window, looking out like he expected to see flashing lights at any moment. "So I ran. I disappeared. Changed my name. Moved from town to town. Never stayed anywhere too long. Until here." Jenna finally sat down. The room felt impossibly quiet. "Why here?" she asked. He turned to her. "Because I was tired. Tired of running. Tired of not existing. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could live a normal life again. One where I could help people instead of hurting them." She wanted to believe him. She really did. But belief came with risk, especially with Ben in the picture. "Do you know who sent me that article?" she asked. He shook his head. "Could be anyone. Could be someone from the old crew trying to rattle me. Could be law enforcement, checking to see if I'd react. I don't know. But I always knew something like this would come eventually." He didn't beg. He didn't ask her to stay silent. He just looked at her with a quiet resignation, as if he'd already accepted whatever decision she would make. And in that moment, Jenna realized she wasn't looking at a criminal anymore. She was looking at a man who had been running for more than a decade, not just from the law, but from who he used to be. A man who, for reasons she didn't fully understand yet, had found a kind of peace living next door to her and her son. She stood up, walked to the door, then turned back to him. "I don't know what I'm going to do yet," she said softly. He nodded once. "That's fair." She stepped outside, heart pounding, air colder than it had been minutes before. The street was quiet, the porch lights glowing in rows like nothing had changed. But everything had. Jenna didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning in endless loops. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, Michael's, or Christian's, depending on which name her mind chose in that moment. She kept going over what he had said, how calm he had been, how honest he had sounded. But honesty didn't erase the fact that he had lived a lie for 12 years. Honesty didn't erase a federal warrant. And it definitely didn't guarantee safety for her or her son. By morning, her decision still hadn't fully formed, but she knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. She couldn't pretend she didn't know the truth. At the very least, someone else knew too, someone who had sent her that article for a reason. If they knew where Christian Reyes was hiding, how long before the wrong person acted on it? How long before the FBI came knocking? Or worse, someone from his past. That afternoon, she was sitting in her car outside the local FBI field office. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. Ben was at school, and she had taken the day off work under the excuse of a family emergency. Her palms were damp, and her fingers trembled slightly on the steering wheel. She wasn't there to turn him in. Not yet. She told herself she just needed information, needed to understand what kind of danger she might be in, what kind of man she was really dealing with. Inside, the office was cold and efficient. A receptionist took her name, asked a few questions, and within minutes, she was led into a small, windowless room with a table and 2 chairs. The man who entered was younger than she expected, mid-30s maybe, but with that hardened look that came from years of dealing with people who lied for a living. He introduced himself as Special Agent Adam Collins. He asked her what brought her in, and she hesitated only a moment before pulling the folded newspaper clipping from her purse and sliding it across the table. His eyes scanned it quickly, and then he looked at her with careful interest. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It was mailed to me. No name, no note. I live 2 houses down from him. He goes by Michael Turner now." Collins leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And you believe this is him?" "I know it is," she said. He didn't deny it. "He told me everything, at least, what he claims is everything." Collins didn't speak right away. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully. Finally, he said, "Christian Reyes has been on our radar for a long time. We don't believe he was the mastermind, but he was part of the breach. The money, the systems, they all had his signature. And then he vanished. We assumed he had help." "He says he was used," Jenna said. "That he tried to get out when he realized what was happening. That he ran because he didn't think anyone would believe him." Collins gave a dry smile. "That's a common story. But it's not impossible. especially if he's been living quietly all this time. No arrests, no violence, no connections to known criminal activity. That's rare. Jenna leaned forward, her voice lower now. He's been kind. To my son. To me. He fixed things around the house. He helped the neighbors. I don't think he's dangerous. But I have a child. I need to know what I'm dealing with. Collins nodded. You're smart to come in. But here's the thing, we've never stopped looking for him. Someone must have known he was in your area. That clipping wasn't just a warning to you. It might have been bait. Or a threat. Either way, he's exposed now. What happens if I don't say anything else? Jenna asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, if you're willing to bring him in, cooperate, we might be able to negotiate. Reduced sentence, possibly witness protection, depending on what he knows. But if we have to go after him, the deal's off the table. Jenna sat back in her chair. The walls felt closer than before, and her chest was tight. Can I talk to him first? Collins studied her. You trust him that much? I'm not sure I trust anyone right now, she said. But I need to hear it from him one more time. And then I'll let you know. He didn't argue. He handed her a card and said, don't wait too long. If someone else's hand is in this, you might not have much time. That night, Jenna knocked on Michael's door again. He answered without surprise, as if he'd been expecting her. She walked inside, didn't sit, didn't hesitate. I talked to the FBI. He closed his eyes briefly and nodded. I figured you would. They're offering a deal. But only if you turn yourself in voluntarily. Witness protection. Maybe a shorter sentence. They said someone else might have tipped them off. Or worse. Michael looked away, jaw tight. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, finally, he said, I don't want to run anymore. I'm tired, Jenna. I'm tired of hiding. Maybe this is my chance to stop looking over my shoulder. Then let's go tomorrow, she said. Together. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, his eyes filled with something other than weariness. Gratitude. Surrender. Okay, he whispered. Tomorrow. The next morning was unusually quiet. Jenna woke early, long before her alarm, and sat at the edge of her bed for several minutes, staring at the floor. The weight of the decision ahead settled over her like a fog. She went through the motions, brushing her teeth, packing Ben's lunch, making coffee, but every movement felt distant, mechanical. Ben was still asleep when she slipped into his room to kiss his forehead. She didn't tell him where she was going. How could she? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the man who fixed your bike and taught you card tricks is turning himself in for a federal crime? Michael was waiting on the porch when she pulled into his driveway. He looked calm, even peaceful, like someone who had finally accepted the storm he could no longer outrun. He was dressed simply in a gray hoodie and jeans, the same kind of clothes he always wore, but now they felt like a uniform for surrender. As he stepped into the car, he gave her a small, quiet smile, grateful, perhaps, or just resigned. They drove in silence. The city passed them by in a blur of gray and motion. Neither of them spoke until they reached the federal building. Jenna parked, shut off the engine, and sat with her hands still on the wheel. Michael looked over at her. You don't have to come in, he said softly. I know, she replied. But I will. Inside, Agent Collins met them in the lobby. His demeanor was professional but not cold. He extended his hand to Michael, who shook it without hesitation. There was no dramatics, no handcuffs, no raised voices, just a quiet understanding among the three of them that a long chase had reached its final step. Collins led them to a private room, where a legal advisor joined them to discuss the terms. Michael gave a full statement. He didn't try to shift blame or play the victim. He told them exactly how he had been recruited, the technical details of how the heist was planned, the roles of the other team members, and how he realized, too late, that he had become expendable. He named names, provided old email records, and offered to testify against those still active in exchange for a deal. He asked for nothing beyond fairness, and even then he asked with caution, as if he knew he didn't deserve it. The process took hours. Jenna sat nearby the entire time, listening quietly. At one point, when Collins stepped out to consult with higher authorities, Michael leaned toward her and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me when it would have been easier." She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him and thought of everything: the day he moved in, the barbecue, the night he fixed her sink, the story about the dog that never felt quite right. Somehow, it all made sense now. The man who had been hiding wasn't just hiding from the law, he had been hiding from his own guilt, from the version of himself that made the wrong choice 12 years ago. When Collins returned, he had news. The Bureau was willing to cut a deal. Michael would face a formal sentence, 2 years in a minimum security facility, but in exchange, he would testify as a key witness in an upcoming trial that involved several high-level figures connected to the original crime. If his testimony held up, he'd be eligible for early release under supervised conditions. After that, he could enter the Federal Witness Protection Program and be relocated, start a new life, legally, this time. Michael didn't hesitate. He accepted the terms with a nod. There was no sense of triumph, just relief. Collins gave Jenna a brief moment with him before he was taken into custody. They stood alone in the hallway, both unsure what to say. Finally, she stepped closer and hugged him, not out of pity, but with quiet, fierce compassion. "I'll be here," she whispered. "No matter where you end up." His arms tightened around her for just a second longer than necessary, and then he let go. "I believe you," he said. Then he was gone, escorted down the hall by 2 officers, disappearing through a door she couldn't follow. Jenna walked back outside alone, the wind colder now than when she'd arrived. But even in the silence, even in the ache of watching him go, she knew something had shifted, not just in him, but in her. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something better. The seasons passed quietly, as if the world itself had chosen not to disturb the space he left behind. 2 years is not a long time when measured by a calendar, but for Jenna, it stretched like a second life. The house next door remained empty. Sometimes a real estate agent would show up, unlock the door, let in a couple looking for a starter home or a retiree seeking quiet, but nothing ever came of it. People always said it felt cold in there, like it wasn't ready to be lived in. Jenna never told them why. Ben asked about Michael often at first. Where he went, why he had to leave, when he was coming back. Jenna had answered carefully, always with enough truth to satisfy him without burdening him. He made a mistake a long time ago, she had told him. And now he's trying to make it right. Ben didn't press further after that. But every few weeks, he would draw a picture or write a little note, and Jenna would send them along in letters. Sometimes she received a response, short and simple, always careful. Michael never complained, never asked for anything. He always ended his letters with the same line, "Tell Ben I'm proud of him." She always did. Around her, life continued. Jenna got a promotion at work, fixed up the house, made new friends in the neighborhood. But nothing filled the space completely. People asked her if she was seeing anyone, and she'd smile and say she was focusing on herself for now. That was true. But part of her heart was somewhere else, somewhere locked away behind gates and rules, where a man was paying for a mistake he hadn't truly made, at least not in the way people assumed. The day of his release arrived on a bright, crisp morning in late March. Jenna drove to the facility in silence, the same way she had driven him to the FBI office 2 years earlier. This time she didn't have to walk him in. This time she was there to take him home. She waited outside the gate, standing beside her car in the sunshine, her coat tucked tightly around her. She tried not to let her mind race, tried not to picture him changed in ways she wouldn't recognize. But when the doors opened and he stepped out, she knew him instantly. He looked different, of course. Thinner. Older. His hair was grayer at the temples, but his eyes were the same. And when he saw her, his face broke into a smile that didn't need words. She crossed the distance between them quickly, and they embraced without hesitation, right there in front of the gate. Neither of them cried. They just held each other as if that was all they needed to remember how to breathe again. They didn't talk much during the drive back. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time, it was warm, familiar. When they reached the neighborhood, he looked out the window at the houses, the trees, the sidewalks he used to walk. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. When she pulled into her driveway, he hesitated before getting out. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "I've been sure for 2 years," she said. "Longer, probably." He followed her inside, where Ben was already waiting at the window. As soon as he saw Michael, he ran to the door, flung it open, and hugged him without a second thought. Michael knelt down, arms around him, and for a long moment, no one said anything. Then Ben pulled back and said, "I kept your room clean." Michael smiled. "You kept mine clean? Well, it's yours again now, right?" Jenna laughed softly from the doorway. "If you want it to be." He looked between them, overwhelmed in a quiet way that didn't need to be spoken aloud. He nodded, and together, they walked into the house. That night, they sat around the dinner table, Jenna, Ben, and Michael, passing dishes, telling stories, laughing in a way that felt completely natural. No tension, no pretending. Just 3 people who had fought through years of silence, doubt, and fear to arrive at something that felt almost like peace. Later, after Ben went to bed, Michael stepped out onto the porch. Jenna joined him, handing him a mug of tea. They stood there together, watching the streetlights flicker on. "I never thought I'd come back here," he said. "You didn't just come back," she replied. "You made it through." He turned to her, his voice softer now. "Do you think people can really change?" She didn't hesitate. "I think the people who want to, really want to, already have." He looked at her, and for the first time since they met, his face was completely unguarded. No fear. No secrets. Just him. "I'm not running anymore," he said. "No," she agreed. "You're finally home." Spring slowly turned into summer, and with it came a gentle rhythm that wrapped itself around their lives like a long-forgotten melody. Michael settled into his new routine with quiet gratitude, never once taking the days for granted. He worked mornings at a small electronics repair shop that Jenna's friend helped him get into, and spent afternoons fixing up the old garage behind Jenna's house, turning it into a proper workspace. It was humble, nothing flashy, just shelves of tools, a workbench, a couple of unfinished projects, but it was his. A space of his own, honest and earned. The neighbors warmed to him again, slowly but surely. Some had known, of course. Word had traveled, as it always does in small communities, but the details were hazy, and most people had chosen not to ask. They saw the man who helped carry groceries, who waved to their kids on the way to school, who shoveled snow off a neighbor's sidewalk without waiting to be thanked. And maybe, in the end, actions spoke louder than history. Ben didn't ask many questions anymore. To him, Michael had simply returned, and that was enough. They spent weekends working on bike repairs or building strange little inventions from spare parts, gadgets that buzzed and blinked and never really worked the way they planned, but kept them both grinning for hours. One evening, Ben told Jenna, with complete sincerity, "I think Michael might be the smartest person in the world." She smiled, touched his hair, and said, "He just might be." Jenna herself had changed too. There was a lightness to her now that hadn't existed before. She didn't feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. The fear that had once lived quietly in her chest, of being alone, of trusting the wrong person, of making one irreversible mistake, had faded. It hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer ruled her. She was, for the first time in years, not just surviving, but living. They didn't rush anything between them. There were no grand confessions, no sweeping declarations. Just small, consistent moments that built something real. Coffee in the morning. A quiet touch on the shoulder as they passed in the hallway. Sharing a book recommendation. Watching a movie in comfortable silence. And sometimes, simply sitting on the porch together, saying nothing at all. One night in late July, after Ben had gone to sleep and the house was quiet, Michael stepped outside and stood at the edge of the porch, staring up at the stars. Jenna joined him a few minutes later, barefoot, holding 2 glasses of wine. She handed him one and leaned against the railing beside him. "It's strange," he said after a while, not looking at her. "I spent so long convincing myself I didn't deserve a second chance. And now, I keep waiting for it to vanish." She sipped her wine, then looked over at him, her voice gentle. "You didn't get a second chance. You built one. That's different." He turned to her slowly, as if hearing something he needed for a long time. "And you don't regret any of it?" She shook her head. "Not for a second." They stood in silence again, the warm night air wrapping around them. Somewhere in the distance, a sprinkler hissed to life. A dog barked once, then quieted. The world felt still. Michael let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "For the first time," he said, "I'm not looking over my shoulder. I'm not hiding. I'm just here." Jenna reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his. "You're not just here," she said. "You're home." And in that moment, under a sky full of stars that neither of them had dared to believe in for a long time, Michael Reyes, once a fugitive, once a man with no future, smiled not because he was safe, but because he was whole.